Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. Heather had a way of making me feel small. It wasn't always obvious, at least not to anyone else. To the outside world, she was charming, energetic, the kind of person who could command a room without even trying. People admired her confidence. They admired her. And maybe in the beginning, so did I. But admiration has a way of turning into something else when you're the one standing in its shadow. It started with little things. A sigh when I told a joke that didn't land. A correction when I was telling a story, always making sure everyone knew I had remembered a detail wrong. An eye roll when I made an offhand comment. These weren't huge moments, but they added up. And slowly, without even realizing it, I started shrinking. At first, I convinced myself I was overthinking. Heather was just outspoken, a strong personality. But then there were moments that cut too deep to ignore. Like the night at the family gathering. Heather's parents were hosting one of their usual dinner parties. Big, extravagant. The kind where people sipped expensive wine and talked about their investments like they were discussing the weather. I had long since learned to just nod along at these things. Heather came from money, and while I had done well for myself as an accountant, I was never really one of them. Dinner was nearly over when Heather, already on her third glass of wine, started telling stories. "You guys would not believe what Scott did last week," she said, grinning as she turned toward me. I already knew what was coming. He tried to fix the sink. I told her we should just call a plumber, but no, he insisted he could handle it himself. She laughed. 2 hours later, there's water everywhere, and he's standing there looking like a lost puppy. Her mother chuckled. "Oh, sweetheart, why didn't you just hire someone?" I tried. "Mom," Heather said, shaking her head. "But you know Scott. He loves to figure things out." She made air quotes, and everyone at the table laughed. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around my fork. It wasn't even true. The pipe had already been cracked. I had fixed it. But Heather left out that part because it wasn't funny. I forced a smile. "Yeah, real disaster," I muttered. Heather patted my arm like I was a child. "It's okay, babe. Not everyone's good with their hands." The table laughed again. I swallowed hard, staring at my plate. This was normal for Heather, twisting the truth just enough to make me look incompetent. And what was I supposed to do? Argue? Call her out in front of her family? She knew I wouldn't. She counted on it. Later that night, as we drove home, I stared out the window, the words sitting on the tip of my tongue. Heather hummed along to the music, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel. "You didn't have to do that," I said finally, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. She glanced at me. "Do what? Make me look like an idiot back there?" She let out a short laugh. "Oh, come on, Scott. It was a joke." I turned to her. "Was it?" She sighed dramatically. "You're so sensitive sometimes." Everyone was laughing. It wasn't a big deal. It was to me. She didn't answer right away. Then she gave me a sideways look, a smirk forming. "Are you mad?" I exhaled sharply, pressing my fingers to my temple. "I'm just tired, Heather." "Yeah, well, maybe if you weren't so bad at fixing sinks, I wouldn't have any stories to tell." I stared at her, but she just kept driving. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just proven my entire point. And that was the moment. Not a blowout fight. Not some big, dramatic realization. Just that quiet second in the car where I knew, deep down, Heather didn't respect me. And I wasn't sure she ever had. Heather had a talent for pushing me just far enough to humiliate me without making it obvious to everyone else. The dinner party had been bad enough, but I convinced myself to let it go. I told myself I was being sensitive, that I was reading too much into things, that Heather wasn't malicious, just careless with her words. Then it happened again, and this time, I didn't let it slide. It was a small get-together with our closest friends. A casual night, beer, pizza, and a game on TV. The kind of night where I should have been able to relax. But Heather couldn't even let me have that. I was standing by the kitchen counter, grabbing another beer when I heard her voice carry over the conversation. "You guys won't believe what Scott did last week," she said, laughing. My shoulders tensed. I turned slowly, watching as she leaned back on the couch, drink in hand, looking so damn pleased with herself. "He tried to assemble a bookshelf from scratch," she continued, shaking her head. "No instructions, no clue what he was doing, just a pile of wood and a dream." Everyone chuckled. Heather grinned. 2 hours later, the thing collapsed like a house of cards. You should have seen his face. Laughter rippled through the room. I clenched my jaw. That's not what happened, I said, keeping my voice even. Heather smirked. Babe, come on, it was funny. I exhaled through my nose. No, what's funny is that I actually built the shelf just fine. You were the one who overloaded it with junk, and that's why it broke. The room went silent. Heather blinked, her smirk faltering. Scott, you tell these stories like I'm some clueless idiot, I said, stepping forward. Like I can't do anything right. But let's be honest, Heather. You just like having an audience. Her face flushed. That's not. You've been doing this for years, I cut in, my voice sharper now. Making me the punchline. Making sure everyone laughs at me instead of with me. No one was laughing now. Heather's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for backup. But for the first time, no one was coming to her defense. Ryan cleared his throat. I mean, he's got a point. Heather's head snapped toward him. What? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. You kind of do make Scott the butt of the joke a lot. Megan, Heather's best friend, hesitated. Yeah, I always thought that was just your dynamic, but maybe it's not so funny to him? Heather looked at me, her jaw tightening. Are you serious right now? I crossed my arms. You dish it out, but you can't take it, huh? Her nostrils flared. You're blowing this out of proportion. I laughed. Actually laughed. Of course I am. Because everything's a joke to you, right? She set her drink down hard on the coffee table. Can we talk about this later? No, I said, my voice firm. We're talking about it now. Heather's face was red now, her whole body stiff. I could see it, the way she was losing control. She was used to being the one in charge, the one who dictated how things went. But I wasn't playing along anymore. I let out a slow breath and looked around the room. I think I'm done for the night. Then I grabbed my jacket, walked to the door, and left. I didn't wait for her to follow. I didn't need to, because for the first time, I was done being her joke. I didn't go home right away. After walking out of Ryan's house, I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the tension settle. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, my pulse still thrumming from the argument. The worst part? I wasn't even sure if Heather would be mad at herself, or just mad that I embarrassed her. By the time I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. The lights were on. She was waiting. I stepped inside, bracing myself. Heather was on the couch, arms crossed, foot tapping impatiently. She didn't even wait for me to take off my jacket before she started. Are you happy now? She snapped. I sighed, closing the door behind me. What are you talking about? You humiliated me in front of our friends. I let out a humorless laugh. Oh, I humiliated you? Yes, Scott. You made me look like some kind of monster. I ran a hand over my face. You don't need my help with that. Her eyes flashed. You're being ridiculous. No, Heather. I'm done. Done letting you treat me like I'm a joke. Done letting you walk all over me. She scoffed. Oh, so you're a victim now? I didn't answer. Because it didn't matter what I said. She'd never admit she was wrong. Instead, I walked past her and into the bedroom. I'm going to sleep. Heather didn't follow. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I couldn't quite describe. Something was off. It wasn't just the fight. It was her reaction. The way she had tried so hard to turn it around on me, instead of apologizing. The way she looked more angry than guilty. Something in my gut told me there was more to this. And I was about to find out exactly what it was. The next morning, Heather left early. She claimed she had a full day of private yoga sessions and wouldn't be back until late. Good. That gave me time. I started looking. At first, I didn't even know what I was searching for, just something. Anything. The house was spotless, as always. Heather was obsessive about keeping things neat, but she had patterns. And one of those patterns? She always kept personal things in the back of her closet. I hesitated for half a second before opening the door. Her side was perfectly arranged, clothes hanging in color-coded rows, shoes aligned neatly. I crouched down, running my hand along the carpet, feeling for something hidden. And then, bingo, a small black box, pushed deep into the corner. I pulled it out and flipped open the lid. Inside was an expensive-looking wristwatch. A men's watch, one I had never seen before. And tucked beneath it, a note. For the moments you make unforgettable. My stomach dropped. The watch wasn't for me. I stared at the note, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. This was proof. Heather was cheating. And suddenly, Everything made sense. The way she constantly tore me down. The way she picked fights over nothing. The way she suddenly needed more retreat weekends to get her energy back. I set the box down and forced myself to breathe. This was it. The confirmation I had been ignoring for too long. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. No, Heather thought she was smarter than me. She thought she could lie, manipulate, and keep all the control. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I put the box back exactly where I found it. And then I started planning. I wasn't going to confront Heather. Not yet. That would be too easy for her. She was too good at twisting the truth, turning arguments back around, making herself the victim. If I wanted to expose her, I needed proof. Cold, undeniable, public proof that would leave her no room to manipulate her way out. I spent the next few days planning carefully, watching her, listening to what she didn't say as much as what she did. She had no idea that the moment I found that hidden watch in the back of the closet, the game had changed. The first step was figuring out who it was. I knew it wasn't just a random fling. Heather was too calculated for that. She didn't take risks unless she thought she could control the outcome. So I started with her retreats. For the past year, she had been leading exclusive wellness retreats at a luxury mountain resort. I had never questioned it. She came home with pictures of group yoga sessions and scenic hikes, and I thought that was the full story. But now I was really looking, and I found something she never expected me to see. The retreat had a website, a clean, professional-looking page filled with nature shots, testimonials, and photos of Daniel, the owner. And right there, in the middle of the homepage, was a picture of him and Heather standing side by side, his arm just barely touching hers. It was subtle, too subtle. I dug deeper. I found the retreat's Instagram page. At first, it was all generic content, mountain views, peaceful cabins, healthy food spreads. But then I started to notice it. Heather, she was in too many of the pictures. One of her laughing at dinner with Daniel. One of her leading a yoga class while he watched from the sidelines. And then, the one that made my stomach turn, a boomerang video of her clinking wine glasses with Daniel. Just the two of them. No other guests. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening into fists. That was it. That was the proof. But I needed more. I needed something undeniable. And I knew exactly how to get it. That night, after Heather had gone to bed, I took her phone while it was charging. I had seen her passcode enough times to memorize it. It took me less than a minute to open her email. And there it was, an email from Daniel. Heather, can't wait for this weekend. The suite is already booked. Same as last time. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I took a screenshot, forwarded it to myself, then carefully deleted the sent message from her account. When I put her phone back, it looked untouched. She'd never know, because now I was setting the trap. Heather thought she was in control. She thought she was so smart, getting away with this for months. But she had no idea that her next retreat would be her last. The next morning, she left early as usual, carrying her yoga mat and a fake, casual smile. I watched from the window as she drove off, my mind already moving to the next step. I sat down on my computer and booked a reservation. One spot at the wellness retreat, under a fake name. She wouldn't see me coming. And when I got there, I was going to catch her in the act. The drive to the retreat was long, winding, and quiet. The kind of road people traveled when they wanted to escape the real world, to find peace, to lose themselves in nature. But I wasn't here for any of that. I wasn't here for wellness or meditation or whatever fake spiritual nonsense Heather had been selling me for months. I was here to end this. I had booked my reservation under a fake name. A simple alias, nothing flashy, just enough to get myself on the guest list without raising suspicion. The moment I arrived at the front desk, I felt my pulse quicken. Any second now, Heather could walk through that lobby and see me. But she didn't, because Heather wasn't in the lobby. She wasn't in the dining hall. She wasn't leading yoga sessions or welcoming guests like the wellness guru she claimed to be. No, Heather was somewhere else, and I already knew where. A young woman behind the desk smiled at me. "Welcome to the retreat. You must be Ryan." I nodded. "That's me." She handed me a welcome packet. "We're so glad to have you. There's a group meditation at 3, a guided nature hike at 5, and dinner service begins at 7. Let me know if you need anything at all. I smiled back. Actually, I do have a question. Of course. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice low. I was hoping to meet Heather before the retreat started. I've heard so much about her. Her classes are the whole reason I signed up. The receptionist's smile faltered just slightly. Heather isn't on the schedule this weekend. I feigned surprise. Really? I thought she was leading private sessions. She hesitated. Oh, well, she does offer one-on-one instruction sometimes, but I'm not sure. Would you be able to tell me where her sessions are held? I asked. I'd love to stop by and introduce myself. She hesitated again. Then, finally, she said she's probably in the VIP suites. Bingo. I kept my smile polite. Thanks. I'll see if I can catch her later. I walked out of the lobby, my blood pounding in my ears. I didn't need to catch her later. I was going to catch her now. The VIP suites were set back from the rest of the retreat, nestled among the trees like private little cabins. Exclusive. Isolated. Hidden. I moved quietly, my steps careful on the stone pathway, my breath slow and steady. And then I saw it. Heather's car, parked behind one of the cabins. I didn't even hesitate. I walked straight up to the door and knocked. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. Then movement. A shuffle. A low voice. And then the sound of the door unlocking. The second it opened, I stepped inside. Heather was standing there, wrapped in a silk robe, her face frozen in shock. Behind her, Daniel was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirtless, his expression shifting from confusion to panic. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Heather's voice came out, shaky. Scott. I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to sweat. Finally, I said, aren't you going to invite me in? Heather's mouth opened and closed, her hands gripping the robe tighter around herself. This isn't what it looks like. I laughed. Actually laughed. Really? Because it looks exactly like what I thought it was. Daniel stood up, reaching for his shirt. I think we should all just take a breath. I snapped my gaze to him. You don't get to speak. He shut his mouth. I turned back to Heather. How long? She swallowed hard. Scott, please, how long? She looked away. A few months. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Heather's eyes widened. What are you doing? I tapped the screen, opening my photos. Oh, just scrolling through some memories. See, I've been doing a little research. And lucky for you, I found something really interesting. I turned the phone toward her. It was the screenshot of Daniel's email. Heather's face went pale. I swiped. The next image? The retreat's Instagram post. The one with Heather and Daniel clinking wine glasses, looking far too comfortable with each other. Swiped again. Another picture. Then another. Every piece of evidence I had collected, one by one. Heather took a shaky step forward. Scott, I can explain. I cut her off. You don't need to, because I already know everything. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Listen, man, you didn't what? I snapped. Didn't think you'd get caught? He held up his hands. I didn't mean for this to happen. I barked out a laugh. You didn't mean to sleep with my wife? Heather's voice was desperate now. Scott, please, let's talk about this in private. Private? I repeated, shaking my head. You want privacy now? Funny, because you didn't seem to care about that when you were sneaking around behind my back. She took another step forward, reaching for my arm. Scott, I stepped back. Don't touch me. Her hand dropped. The room was suffocating, the air thick with tension. Finally, I exhaled and put my phone back in my pocket. I'm done here. Heather's eyes widened. What do you mean? I looked her dead in the eye. I mean you can stay here with him. Because when you come home, Heather, I turned toward the door. There won't be a home left for you. And then I walked out, leaving her and Daniel standing in their pathetic little love nest. I didn't look back, because I wasn't just walking away. I was about to take everything from her. I drove home in silence. No music, no distractions, just the sound of my tires on the pavement and the steady pounding of my heart. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. Those emotions had burned through me back at the retreat, leaving something colder, sharper in their place. I had given Heather years of my life. Years of patience, sacrifice, and loyalty. And for what? So she could throw it all away for some weekend fantasy? By the time I pulled into the driveway, my mind was already 5 steps ahead. Heather would come home eventually, expecting to talk her way out of this, to manipulate me into forgiving her. But she had no idea I had already set things in motion. I walked inside, took off my jacket, and sat at my desk. Then I opened my laptop and started working. First, I accessed our shared accounts. I moved everything, savings, investments, even the emergency fund, into a private account under my name only. Heather had always laughed about how boring my job was, how she could never imagine dealing with spreadsheets and numbers all day. Maybe she should have paid more attention. Next, I drafted an email to my lawyer. I wanted divorce papers ready immediately. I attached the proof of her affair, the emails, the retreat photos, everything she would try to deny. Then, the final touch. I pulled up the retreat's website and found the investor contact list. Heather had built her brand on being a respected wellness instructor. People trusted her, looked up to her. I was about to take all of that away. I drafted a simple email. To whom it may concern, it has come to my attention that your lead wellness instructor, Heather, has been engaging in an inappropriate relationship with the retreat's owner, Daniel, while misusing her position for personal gain. Attached, you will find undeniable proof of this misconduct. I trust you will handle this matter accordingly. Best, Scott. I attached the photos, double-checked everything, and hit send. And then, I waited. Heather showed up a few hours later, looking wrecked. Her hair was messy, her eyes red-rimmed. She had probably cried the entire way home. Good. She stepped inside, hesitating at the doorway, like she wasn't sure if she still belonged here. Scott, she said quietly, can we talk? I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Go ahead. She took a shaky breath. I know I hurt you, but I swear it wasn't. Don't, I interrupted. Don't lie to me again. Her mouth snapped shut. I let the silence stretch between us before speaking again. I know everything. Heather. The emails. The weekends at the retreat. The gifts. I tilted my head. Does Daniel like his new watch? She flinched. I pushed away from the counter, closing the space between us. I was never enough for you, was I? My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. You needed the attention, the admiration. And when that wasn't enough, you needed someone new. Tears welled in her eyes. Scott, save it, I said, stepping back. I'm not here for an apology. I don't need one. She swallowed hard, her hands shaking. Are you really throwing everything away over this? I laughed, the sound bitter. Me? I'm throwing everything away? I gestured around the house. Who was it that lied? Who was it that cheated? She wiped at her eyes. I never wanted to lose you. Then maybe you should have thought about that before sneaking into some guy's cabin every weekend. Her breathing was uneven now, her whole body trembling. Can we fix this? I stared at her for a long moment. And then I smiled. No. Her face crumpled. Scott. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. Here. She hesitated before taking it. The second she opened it, her breath hitched. Divorce papers? I nodded. Already signed on my end. All you have to do is sign yours. She flipped through the pages, her hands trembling. You're serious? As serious as you were when you walked into that suite with him. She looked up at me, searching my face for something, sympathy, regret, anything she could use to keep me from going through with this. But I wasn't going to break. Not this time. Her shoulders slumped. I don't know where to go, she whispered. I shrugged. Not my problem. Her lip quivered. Scott, please. I turned away, walking to the front door. You can stay here until tomorrow, but after that, you're gone. She let out a choked sob. I didn't care. I opened the door, holding it for her. Good night, Heather. She stared at me for a long moment before finally stepping outside. I closed the door behind her. I woke up the next morning to an email from my lawyer. The divorce papers had been officially filed. It was happening. This was real. There was no going back, no second chances, no carefully worded apologies that could undo what Heather had done. She had burned everything to the ground, and now she was standing in the ashes, realizing she had nothing left. She didn't leave that morning like I told her to. Instead, she lingered. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone like she was waiting for some miracle. You're still here, I said, leaning against the doorway. Heather looked up, eyes swollen from crying. I need time to figure things out. I exhaled sharply. Not my problem. She blinked like she couldn't believe I was being this cold, like I was supposed to care. I have nowhere to go, Scott, she said quietly. I folded my arms. Call Daniel. I'm sure he has plenty of room in his fancy retreat. Her jaw tightened. I already did. That caught my attention. I raised an eyebrow. She looked down at her phone again, gripping it so hard her knuckles went white. He's not answering. I laughed. Actually laughed. Let me guess. He got spooked the second things got real? Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I shook my head. Wow. So, you threw away your marriage for a guy who won't even pick up the phone when you need him? Heather's face crumpled, and for a split second, I saw the realization hit her. She had lost everything. But I didn't care. Get out, I said. She lifted her gaze. Scott, I'm serious. Pack your things and go. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't stick around to watch. I walked out of the kitchen and into my office, shutting the door behind me. I had bigger things to focus on, because today was about making sure Heather never got to twist this into something it wasn't. I opened my laptop and went through the files I had collected. The retreat photos, the emails, screenshots of her conversations with Daniel. I had gathered everything I needed to bury her. At exactly noon, I met with my lawyer. Are you absolutely certain you want to push for full control of the house? He asked, flipping through the paperwork. Yes, I said. Heather doesn't deserve a dime. He nodded. You have a strong case. With the proof you provided, the judge will see she was unfaithful, which works in our favor. Since you were the primary financial provider, we can argue that she contributed very little to the household's expenses. That makes it easier to ensure you walk away with the assets. And what about the business? I asked. He smirked. Funny you should ask. I looked into it. Turns out, since Heather filed the business under both your names for tax benefits, you technically own half of her wellness brand. I leaned back in my chair. You're telling me I own part of the thing she built for herself? Legally? Yes. I exhaled slowly. Perfect. Heather had spent years acting like she was better than me, like she had built something of her own while I was just the boring husband working a 9 to 5. Well, now that something of her own, half of it belonged to me. I spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing everything. Heather was going to fight this. I knew that much, but it wouldn't matter. The moment this went to court, she'd lose. I walked out of my lawyer's office feeling lighter than I had in years. And when I got home, Heather was gone. She had left without a word. No note, no goodbye. Just gone. Good. I didn't want closure. I wanted justice. And I was about to get it. The silence in the house was deafening. For years, I had grown used to Heather's presence. The sound of her voice drifting from room to room, the way she clicked her nails against the kitchen counter when she was deep in thought, the scent of her expensive candles filling the air. Now, all of it was gone. And instead of feeling empty, I felt free. I walked through the house, taking in the space that was now mine. No more tension. No more second-guessing myself. No more walking on eggshells around a woman who had spent years treating me like an afterthought. I grabbed a trash bag and started clearing things out. First went the framed wedding photos. Then the little decorative pillows she had insisted we needed, the ones I had secretly hated but never argued over. Then her yoga mat, still rolled up in the corner of the living room. By the time I was done, it felt like I could finally breathe. I wasn't just getting rid of her stuff. I was getting rid of the weight of her. And for the first time in a long time, I could actually think about my future. I sat down at my desk and started making a list. Sell the house. Move somewhere new. Start over. I didn't want to stay in a place that had been built on lies. Every room in this house held a memory of a life that no longer existed. I wasn't going to let myself drown in that. The next morning, I made an appointment with a realtor. By the afternoon, I had multiple offers. Turns out, when you're not tied down by someone else's bullshit, things move fast. The only thing left to do was decide where to go next. I didn't want to move far, but I wanted change. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere that wasn't haunted by Heather's betrayal. I ended up finding a small apartment on the other side of town. Modern, clean mind. It wasn't much, but it was a fresh start. And that was all I needed. The day I officially left the house, I stood in the empty living room for a moment, taking it all in. The walls, the floors, the echoes of a past life. Then, without a second thought, I walked out and didn't look back. Moving into the apartment felt like shedding old skin. I set up my new place the way I wanted, simple, comfortable, with zero traces of Heather. I reconnected with old friends, went out more, focused on work, and slowly, day by day, I started to feel like myself again. Heather had spent so much time making me feel small, making me question my worth. But the truth was, I was never the weak one. She was, because only weak people need to lie to feel powerful. The first few weeks after moving felt like stepping into a new life. No tension, no forced conversations, no waking up beside someone who had been lying to me for months. Just peace. It was strange at first, waking up alone in my new apartment. There was no sound of Heather rushing to get ready for her retreats, no passive-aggressive comments over breakfast, no forced small talk about her latest wellness scam. Just me, the hum of the city outside, and the quiet realization that I had finally done it. I had escaped her, and the best part? She was the one suffering now. The fallout from her affair had been swift. The investors at the retreat had seen the evidence I sent them. Heather lost everything. The retreat distanced itself from her completely, issuing a formal statement about their strict professional conduct policies and how they could not support instructors who violated those standards. Translation? She was fired. Her brand, her reputation, the entire fake life she had built for herself, it was crumbling around her. And Daniel? He wasn't answering her calls. She had thrown everything away for him, and the second things got difficult, he dropped her. She tried to salvage things. She posted some desperate Instagram stories about taking a break and focusing on healing, but the comments told a different story. People weren't buying it. She wasn't some enlightened wellness guru. She was just another liar. One day, I got a text from an unknown number. "Heather, can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I blocked the number. I had nothing left to say to her. A few days later, I ran into Megan, one of Heather's friends, at a coffee shop. She hesitated before approaching, probably debating whether or not she should say anything. "Scott," she said cautiously. "Hey." I nodded. "Hey, Megan." She shifted awkwardly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know everything that was going on, and I feel like I should have." I shrugged. "Not your fault." She sighed. "Heather's a mess." I smirked. "I bet." Megan shook her head. "She's been couch surfing. She doesn't have a job, and she says she can't believe you're doing this to her." I let out a short laugh. "I didn't do anything to her. She did this to herself." Megan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think she's starting to realize that." I took a sip of my coffee. "Too late." Megan gave me a small, knowing smile. "Yeah, too late." We chatted a little longer before she left, and as I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt it again, that lightness in my chest, that freedom. Heather had spent years making me feel small. She had spent months betraying me, thinking I'd never find out. Now, she was the one drowning, and I was the one who got to walk away, stronger, wiser, and completely free. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.